Hello, hello, hello. I like you guys. If you want to join our realm and play with us, please join our Discord. This is mind-blowing. This will tell you everything you need to know about the world. So a New York Times boss held a meeting and a recording got out. So you need to be careful because the first time you hear this, you get a framing and your bias will contort to that framing. But this framing looks legit. The New York Times held a meeting and the boss said to the staff, "We had built and structured our business around this Russia collusion thing, and it didn't work out." What a surprise. So we now have to structure it around racism in this country. So then we need to ask the question, is there a lot of racism in this country? If you ask some people, they may say yes. But does that look like the major story for 2019, 2020? As you experience life and look around your problems every day, your everyday problems, you look at your everyday problems, is racism one of the top 20 things? There has never been less racism in any country in the history of the world than the US today. Look at New York. You can see the legacy of the Dutch settlement. That was open to everybody as long as you had money. You had money, no problem. You're a freed slave, your money is good there. So compared to the United States in the 60s and 70s, that was pretty racist. But we've done an amazing job of getting rid of that. It's the most successful at getting rid of that. So here's what Cortez has to say about this.
We need to talk about racism, its contours, its histories, where it manifests, how it's used. Because like all winning political phenomena, whether they're good, bad, in your opinion, they rely on a coalition building. So Trump relied on a coalition, and a core part of that coalition were racist. Building a coalition with all sorts of other people that could be susceptible to racist views. They were blanketed and layered and made people feel good about it not being a racist thing. And so there are a lot of people who support Trump that generally don't believe they are racist. Because we do not talk or educate or recognize racism or something like that.
So you know she's the loudest and the clearest voice that opposes Trump, that opposes the president. Before I say what she says about racism, I need to tell you what a real problem sounds like. Here's what a real problem sounds like. There's a fire burning down houses. Bill was murdered. There's an earthquake. There's a recession. That's a problem. There's a war. Now that's a problem. So the thing to note about these problems, what they all have in common, there's something that all these problems have in common. They're all easy to describe. You can just look at it. So here's what she says about racism in 2019.
We need to talk about racism, its contours, its histories, where it manifests, how it's used. Because like all winning political phenomena, racism, or something like that.
What the heck is she saying? Remember, this is what a real problem sounds like. There is a fire, there is an earthquake, someone was murdered, there is a war, there is a recession, there is a hurricane. Those are what problems sound like. This is what no problems sound like. If you want to have a bad problem, it should be like this precisely. You want a problem that doesn't exist? You need to use clever words and a lot of unproven assumptions to describe it. If you have to try this hard to describe a problem, this problem is not in your top 10 problems. If that's how you have to talk about it, you don't have a problem. You don't have an example. People talking about racism is as big a problem as racism. Talking about it makes you think it exists, especially when there's a minute amount of it. There is a minute amount of it if there is more than none of it. We've reached a point where talking about racism is more of a problem than racism. when was the last time you saw a racist thing? When was the last time you saw a person make a decision based on racism? In a world that you would like to exist but doesn't exist, you get to hear the news. That doesn't happen in this world. The New York Times just admitted the news is fake. But you're going to have many interpretations because people like to think they see and what they hear is reality. But from what the boss said, it looked like they were saying what the framework is for filling in the news. And that's their job, to go fill in the parts. The old framework is that Russian collusion is the framework. So go find stuff and prove that. Confirmation bias. Now it's go find stuff and make fake news about racism because the New York Times is anti-Trump. We don't have a gigantic racism whatever. These kinds of news organizations don't report the news. They make the news. And here's a good example. As you remember, the story, think about Watergate, the Watergate scandal. As you remember, this story was broken by the Washington Post. But that's not true. That's wrong. If you believe that, you're in a hysteria, because that's wrong. So there was a smaller publication that printed the story before the WAPO. But no one cared about it. No one cared about it because it was a small publication. The Watergate scandal became a national scandal because the Washington Post reported it, the WAPO. And that's the truth. So the other press has to cover the fact that the big press covered the story. The fact that the big corporate news press covered it, that is news in of itself. The New York Times just said they're going to make out of nothing a story of racism in the U.S. They're going to make that story. They're going to turn it into a narrative because once they do that, the other media has to match it or talk about it. They've hoaxed. They admit they made up a hoax, and they congratulate themselves on the hoax. Gosh, it's like these people. Think about this. There's people that don't ever pay attention to, you're not going to hear this from them. This story, you're not going to hear this from the New York Times. They're not going to report on how they are fake news. And so you have people living in this world going about thinking that the New York Times reports the news. And they'll never be better for it.